Are you ready, kids?
Hello, it's Employee a Million, and welcome back to SpongeComs. Today's episode is Season 4, Episode 10, or Episode 70 overall, Chimps Ahoy and Ghost Host, both of which originally premiered on Nick Friday night on May 5th, 2006. And the funny thing about my notes for this SpongeComs is that they were more out of whack than I thought they'd be. I thought I'd have a lot of notes for Ghost Host and not many for Chimps Ahoy, because Chimps Ahoy is the slightly weaker of the two episodes here, in my personal opinion. But no, I actually have a lot to say about Chimps Ahoy, so let's get started. It was written by Luke Brookshire, Tom King, and Stephen Banks. They've well settled into their roles at this point in the show, and I think largely it shows in this episode. In terms of old stuff, Andrew Overtomb is directing more regularly again, and I don't know if that's why SpongeBob and Patrick's designs look more classic here. You'll notice at certain points in this episode, SpongeBob almost seems to revert back to his Season 1 trapezoid shape, which I kind of like. Again, Season 4 is a very weird season animation-wise, and I kind of like that idea that somehow they might have gotten the Season 1 and 2 model sheets mixed up in some sense. But yeah, it is a breath of fresh air, given that, their designs were getting more cutesy around this time, and, they've gone slightly back to the big old weirdo look of Season 1 that I really do like. And a weird thing about this episode is that the title is a random pop culture reference, I guess if you consider food pop culture. Chimps Ahoy is a pun on Chips Ahoy, which I took way too long to realize is a brand of chocolate chip cookies in America. I didn't know that growing up. I didn't know it was a reference to anything because we don't have Chips Ahoy down here. Maybe they're good, maybe they're not. I mean, it's a good Sandy episode at the beginning here. They're finally giving us a reason as to why Sandy is undersea, which is a good reason, giving her other mammals to, be familiar with, who are also scientists somehow. Doesn't get into the nitty-gritty, but does provide a bigger context as for why she's down here, which, is important if you're going to keep the show going. That question was eventually going to have to be answered, so good that they answered it quite early in the post-movie era. I mean, I'm still satisfied by it. I'm just glad there isn't a terrible direct-to-streaming movie that retcons the chimps and says that Sandy has some other much stupider reason for being underwater. And this episode was produced a little later into Season 4 than some of these other episodes from around this time, which is why it's the only episode from the first half of the season to be on the Volume 2 DVD as opposed to the Volume 1 DVD. It was originally going to be paired with, I want to say, either All That Glitters or Whale of a Birthday. I can't remember. But they got shuffled around a bit. This was brought forward. I guess because of the guest stars, they wanted to show them off early. Funny thing is, one of the question answers for this one points out that, last pairing was very British themed because of the British TV show parody and the British guest star. And I guess we're in SpongeBob's British period because we've got a trio of British comedians playing chimps. And that's just kind of... Did they have to be celebrities? I don't know, but they turn in fine performances for these fine characters. But oddly enough, of them, Christopher Ryan, Nigel Planter, and Rick Mayall, Christopher Ryan is the only one uncredited, which must have been a mistake, and, well, it's another British actor, might as well throw Doctor Who into this. Did you know that Christopher Ryan, and the only other thing I care about with him in it besides SpongeBob. He played Lord Kiv in the 1986 Doctor Who serial Mind Warp and a Sontaran in the new series. Glad to get that off my chest. If you don't want to hear like random Doctor Who trivia in these SpongeBob commentary tracks, you're free to make your own with random Star Wars tracks if you want, or facts. Someone make a competing SpongeBob commentary track series that randomly turns into Star Wars or Star Trek or Space 1999 facts, just to balance all of this out. Oh, and Plot Hole Ahoy. If the chimps were arriving in the afternoon, why is there like this night montage? It's for atmosphere, and also because it's a bit hard ask to believe that SpongeBob and Patrick could make this whole thing in a day. But, yeah, it is kind of strange that they set up this time limit and then sort of hushed it away. As for the other guest stars, Nigel Plana, he's fine. I think he's the big one. He has the funniest line where they just kind of question the logistics of the tree dome. And Rick Mayall, the late Rick Mayall, one of the funniest people to ever come out of the UK. And I say this with my broadest exposure to him being Blackadder. And, he's funny in that show. Not his best material here, but, I can't really blame him. These folks, they're just sort of okay. What elevates them is that they're at least better than Patrick is at this point in the episode, where he just kind of gets a big head for no reason. Even though it seems like he and SpongeBob had equal rights and equal patents over this invention, Patrick turns into a Wright Edison here, and it is kind of... He's gotten a big head about things before, but it just comes out of nowhere and then leaves out of nowhere. He gets a bit of punishment at the end of the episode, which makes it sting a little less than it probably would. But another thing that's starting to creep into the show now is the conversation music. Now, as the show has gone on, it's slowly eschewed APM and used more of its own in-house crafted music. And in season 4, they started making these conversation tracks that are just very slow and plotty, and even when they're just on screen or in your ear, they just feel like they're slowing things down and breaking the pace, and I don't think I've ever really liked the conversation music. It's fine in the context of these are just these very posh, stuffy people because they're British and it's a cartoon. Obviously, they're posh and stuffy. But I think what really keeps the episode up isn't just the cheerful ending where, inventions are useful somehow, but also just what it's saying about invention, because every party in this episode, Sandy, SpongeBob and Patrick, and the monkeys, are only really seeing use out of inventions that they want. Sandy has all her nut experiments. SpongeBob and Patrick have this big contraption that's everything they seemingly want to get use out of, but just completely decimates Rick Mayall here. And the chimps just only grant Sandy's contract an extension the second that they make an invention that works for them. And I think what it's trying to say is inventions do start off with this personalized appeal, but it's the very good ones, the very best, that become useful for whole swaths of the world. And I think it's woven pretty cleverly into the story here. And it is a bit touching story at points because it's about Sandy almost leaving Bikini Bottom. She tends to sing a song every time she's almost leaving Bikini Bottom, and the one for this episode is catchy for what it is. I don't think it quite tops the raw emotion that comes out of the old one, but I like the composition of it. And Interesting ending here, just looking back at this episode after so many years, is the chimps say that they've extended Sandy's contract for 20 years. So, season 15 SpongeBob writers bring these chimps back somehow. You can't get Rick Mayol back because he's passed away. And I don't know about the others because whenever there's like a 60% chance of any old British comedian that these days they're just in the press complaining about how they can't be funny anymore. So I don't know if these guys have the cleanest track record, but I don't know. Maybe they can be useful somehow in some way. It'd be fun to bring these characters back for the 20th anniversary, or at least acknowledge it in some official capacity. Like, hey, we didn't expect the show to be on this long. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge. But, yeah, overall, Chimps Ahoy is an episode that has slowly grown on me. I used to really just be very neutral on it because although it was a touching Sandy episode, I just found the chimp stuff to be a pacebreaker. But the more I think about it, the more I think it's fine. It's saying something about invention that matters. It must have been fun to get these celebrities in to voice these very personality-driven characters, and I mean, it is a milestone in that it is the first time movie content is used in an episode with the Goofy Goober back scratcher. It's barely Goofy Goober, patented, but it does predate them bringing Perch Perkins onto the show, which, is interesting. And Ghost Host. This is a highlight from, the latter period of season 4 for me. Even though if it were in any other later season, I'd have to be constantly defending my stance on it. Because there are little traces of the future in this one, just like in Squid Bob Tentacle Pants and Good Neighbors. It is one of those where you can see the show figuring out what it wants to be for the next couple years. I think we're over the Diet Season 3 sort of episodes, and it's starting to feel like a different take on SpongeBob, for good and for ill. It was written by Zeus Service, Eric Weiss, and Tim Hill. Tim Hill leaves early into season 5, but Zeus and Eric stick around for a while, so they're able to capitalize on what succeeded here. It's a Flying Dutchman episode, so you just know it's going to be a bit creepier, and well, Dutchie's great in this. I like how, SpongeBob has a rapport with him at this point, and the Squidward face there, expertly drawn by Robert Ryan and Corey, I think. And he's an artist that joined in Dungeons and Dragons, may have been hired a bit before, but it's his work on the show, his characters' designs and stuff, where the show starts to get a lot more grotesque and off-putting. And, for a horror-themed episode, like one with the Flying Dutchman, it works. I can see why they wanted to go with it here, but there is some stuff that he drew in season 6 and later that, has artistic merit, but is way more grotesque than it needs to be for a lighthearted comedy cartoon. They'll just throw in, muscles and guts out of nowhere, and, really, the most terrifying it gets here is SpongeBob's, the Flying Dutchman's big SpongeBob face, his eyes falling out and him getting covered with spiders. And SpongeBob's eyes have fallen out before. It's taking, this general off-the-wall cartoony humor and just turning it into horror rather than making it, something that it isn't really. I feel like they are still in the parameters of what they understand SpongeBob to be, which is important. And another thing I like about this episode is that it has got this, energy of being a sequel to Shanghai, one of my favorite episodes of all time, of any TV show, and of Can You Spare a Dime, which I can say the same thing about, because it is about. There is this big period of Dutchie trying to scare people and failing, much like what happened with SpongeBob and Patrick in Shanghai. But then it also turns into one of those character stays over and starts mooching off of the other guy, and the other guy just lets it happen for a while and gets very stressed about it. And it's not always a very fun plot to see play out, even if it is endlessly relatable, but I think these SpongeBob episodes have the upper hand in that this is a very applicable plotline to SpongeBob as a character, because they do come from SpongeBob wanting to help out this downtrodden person in his life. I mean, Squidward, one of his best friends who's been out of work for who knows how long, and the Flying Dutchman, who was this intimidating being, but is sort of losing his luster, thinks he's out of it. And that could, I mean, if I was snarky, I could say that's some meta commentary about how the SpongeBob crew think that they're losing their luster, but no, they probably still thought of themselves as, they weren't getting that much criticism at the time. I mean, at the time this episode was finished being storyboarded, they probably hadn't even premiered season 4 yet, so I don't know. But there is an explanation for why this happens, and at least it's only a minute at most, and Dutchie gets over it. SpongeBob has his big yell. We get Nancy being there in this weird relationship with the Dutchman, and we get some cool ghost designs, and SpongeBob gets that big no thing that I've seen on social media. People really took to that random breakout of all the ones that SpongeBob's had over the show. I think it's just very straight and to the point, and that's why it's funny, and it's like, hey, I'm SpongeBob, I'm not putting up with this again. I've already been through Can You Spare a Dime? Just one time card, please, and we're done with it. And it also leads into this great little read from Tom Kenny of just, I'm pathetic, yes you are. Like, SpongeBob is just being so brutally honest about the way things are going, but then he just reverts back to his nice self and puts in this very weird VHS tape, and this has to be based on something, doesn't it? Something incredibly specific that one of the writers had gotten out years ago and just wanted to put in the show, and it is endlessly quotable. All the visuals are amazing for what they are, but I'm left with so many questions. What's a chicken doing there? Like, all these questions about like where they came up with this. Was there some sort of VHS tape series of these abstract visuals that, you know, the internet's going to rediscover soon and turn into a meme? I bet that's what's going to happen. People are going to go back to the SpongeComs once the origin of this parody is discovered and say, hey, this is a reference to this. Everyone's quoting it now. Also weird is that, you know, Larry barely appears in season 4, and both times I've seen so far, it's in a horror context. Last time it was Squid Bob Tentacle Pants because, well, that's, you know, the episode where they just put him in the, you know, foreground for some reason, even though he doesn't appear in the big explosion. And here they're redoing the bit of, you know, some Dutchie or someone Dutchie adjacent trying to scare him. But they give him something to say just to prove, hey, he's not, you know, a zombie. We aren't just gonna keep him as a background character. There's still potential showing in him, and I can hardly remember if he shows up in season 5 at all, so, you know, have to wait until season 6 to live like Larry. So I've had a lot of, you know, very positive things to say about this episode and defend it for doing, because This is one of those episodes of the post-movie era that people are torn on, but I'm on the more positive side of. That hardly ever happens. Well, it happens quite a bit in season 4 and 5, but not much for like the later post-movie seasons. And oh yeah, it does kind of end with them putting Squidward through the gamut, but at least no, you know, serious physical harm is coming to him. Just a lot of psychological harm as he's frightened by ghosts. And I don't know if it's about not believing in ghosts or something, which might be weird because he has seen the Flying Dutchman before on the Dutchman's ship and at the Halloween party, but if you if Dutchie really wanted to scare Squidward here in this episode, and if he ever wanted to scare Squidward ever, he should have just broken into him while he was bathing, broken into his bathroom. That would set him off, make him scream for like 15 seconds. It's funny meme, but it might be quicker than all this, but at least it's got, some good animation to offer. A lot of the things that the Flying Dutchman used to scare SpongeBob are being used to mess with Squidward. I like how one of the big break it moments, or where things are getting serious, it's just SpongeBob breathing at Squidward. And of course, you've got the neat little reference to SpongeBob's parlor trick that the Flying Dutchman uses, and that somehow just puts it over the line. They must have had Shanghai on the mind when devising this episode, and I couldn't be happier. I mean, later this year, I've got another cartoon review about a show where Brian Doyle Murray plays this sort of deadbeat freeloader pirate. He might be getting typecast because he's got this assignment twice now, but he does it incredibly well. I'm always excited to see when and if the Flying Dutchman comes back onto the show, because then we'll get more gripping episodes like this. I'm very excited for that Search for SquarePants movie that Derek Dryman's working on too, that is about the Flying Dutchman from what I know, and hey, maybe it'll break the trend of each movie being slightly worse than the last. And that was Chimps Ahoy and Ghost Host, a very interesting pair of episodes that I was able to talk my way through the whole bunch of, so yeah, it's fun to just have someone yapping in your ear while you're trying to watch SpongeBob, isn't it? My question time for you is one I might have asked before, but what's your favorite Sandy episode? There's a couple that I really appreciate on some level, like Texas and Sandy, SpongeBob and the Worm, and Karate Choppers. I think those are my top 3, and they're mostly from the very early days of the show, but they use Sandy a bit more in season 4, so I'd like to hear if you've got an answer from this season or any other. As for last time, what's a guest star that you really want in SpongeBob? A lot of answers, which I'm very happy to see. Sparkling with Night says Jack Black, without a doubt. I think the closest we're ever going to get to that is that Nickelodeon bumper with SpongeBob and Poe carving the Nickelodeon logo out of martial arts. That's a fun bumper, and I don't think there's anything that can compare to just that randomness. Bryceform says 4-way tie between Kelly Clarkson, Olivia Hack, Victoria Justice, and Janice Kawai. Pepe Le Pew, Alex Brightman from Beetlejuice and Fizzaroli. Angry Jack, Charlie Day, that'd be absolutely weird. I think Danny DeVito would be a good choice as well. Dash L7, Seth MacFarlane, that'd be a very strange choice, but I can kind of see that working in a weird way. Carson Ibera, Mike Nelson, Kevin Murphy, and Bill Corbett from Mystery Science 3000. Also Dan Castellaneta and Hank Azaria. I think of the Simpsons voice actors, Hank is the only one still doing work because everyone else just gets enough money from doing The Simpsons ever since the season 23 pay rise. Snake Man, honestly, Trey Parker and Matt Stone, they've got that connection with Kyle McCulloch, so, maybe on Friday the 13th, on a blue moon, during the middle of April in a superstorm or whatever that Mermaid Man origin story was, maybe then that could happen. Mr. Gaigu, Weird Al Yankovic, thanks for agreeing with me. And Random Lad, nice to see some subtle theming with this pairing. Question, probably Dan Aykroyd. That would be very strange, but I could see them bringing him onto an episode, to make fun of all his conspiracy things. But I think it's going to take a couple years because I really don't know how many people would be quick to associate with Nickelodeon at the moment after, the sins of their live-action department were exposed a few months ago. But those are all interesting answers that I could talk about in various capacities. But next week, we've got some surprises, birthday surprises and mysterious videotape surprises in Whale of a Birthday and Karate Island. Goodbye for now.